Hey, everybody, this is Heidi St. John. Welcome to the Heidi St. John podcast. Many of you guys have been listening to my show for many, many years. And so you've watched me make a transition from the busy homeschool mom to the busy mom to Heidi St. John to Off the Bench to the Heidi St. John podcast. And over those years, I have really been burdened to speak the truth to the culture, to really meet you at the intersection of faith and culture. And I could not be more excited and thankful to have my guest in the studio with me today. I started following Walt Heyer several years ago when we were in the height of the drag queen story hour controversy. And as Walt and I were talking yesterday, I said to him, I started speaking out about the issue of transgenderism in the homeschool community about 8 years ago when no one was talking about it, feeling like this could not possibly take root in the culture. I had no idea that it had already taken root. And so his story both fascinated and encouraged me. And I couldn't believe when he accepted my invitation to come out to the Pacific Northwest all the way from North Carolina. We're going to be talking about Walt's journey. It really is a redemption story. It's a story of healing and a story of hope, and you guys are going to love it. We're not going to hold anything back today. If you've got little ones, and I know sometimes you do, this is my warning to you, as I sometimes give. We're going to be talking about some issues that are pretty important today, and we're not going to really be holding anything back. So take that into account as you listen with your little ones today. But I'm very excited that you're here. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So thank you guys for tuning in today. Before I jump into it with my friend Walt, I want to thank our sponsor. Not Consumed is sponsoring the podcast, and you guys can find family Bible studies over there. Really wonderful information for you that is going to be life-giving. If you go to notconsumed.com/Heidi, you can download a free 5-day Bible study for your family and use the coupon code Heidi at checkout for 15% off your entire purchase. We really want to thank our sponsors. I hope you guys will check them out. All right, I have been waiting for this moment for a long time, longer than my friend Walt realizes, because I am a super fan of you, really? Walt Heyer. I really am. Welcome to the Pacific Northwest.
This is fantastic to be here.
I'm so thrilled you're here. Welcome to the studio. You're only my second in-person guest.
Wow.
So you can see we're still kind of in construction mode, but we're getting there, and I'm just so honored that you're here with your wife.
The honor is mine, really.
Thank you.
Truly.
Thank you. Well, this is special, and I'm going to jump right into this. We've had a chance to visit. You and I were on a panel together.
We were
at was it the NRB?
NRB.
Yeah.
Last year.
Yes, in Nashville, and I was so. I mean, I'm always impressed. I read your articles. I've watched the videos that you've put out. I've been reading Sex Change Regret, which is the website that you started for many years. Just so blown away by what the Lord is doing in your life. And one of the things you said, and I'm going to start here with you, yesterday when we were talking, is you were like, look at me, 84 years old, and people are still calling me.
Yeah.
God's doing an amazing thing in your life, Walt Heyer, and I want to be like you when I grow up. So I'm just so thankful that you're here.
I'm blessed.
So let's go back. I want to introduce you to my audience, because there will be people that have never heard of you here, but they will not be unfamiliar with the topic of transgenderism, because I have been talking about it for years here at the show. Right. But tell us a little bit about your story and where you came from, because as we said yesterday, context is everything.
Right.
And I think it's important for people to understand who Walt Heyer is and where you came from.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thank you. Well, it started actually in 1944, 80 years ago. And it started when my grandmother, she was a seamstress, and I would kind of lean on her sewing machine watching her. She made women's clothing. That was her business back in those days. And she thought I was really interested in the clothing, and so she made me a purple chiffon dress.
So 1944. So people who think this started in 2011, you're like, no, not really. No.
They were doing surgeries in the 70s, even in the 60s. Yes. So it is not new.
Yeah.
It's exploded because of social media primarily. But so in 1944, she made me a purple chiffon dress, full-length evening dress. She made it specifically for my little 4-year-old body. And I think what's so instructive, Heidi, is that we're just learning and we're just discussing. I'm so glad we're talking about this, because when you put a boy in a dress, hear my words. It is psychological and emotional child abuse. Period. You're not helping that child. The child's in this early development stage, and the brain isn't fully developed until 25, sometimes even later.
Sometimes 40.
Yeah, and sometimes,
Sometimes never.
I have some friends where they're 70 and still not there yet. So, I think it's so instructive for us. They think it's benign.
Yeah.
And it's destructive. It's child abuse. We need to call it what it is. We're not just cross-dressing. We're creating in them the idea that there's something wrong with them. You see, it's like they see themselves when you start doing that as somebody that there's something wrong with me because I'm not acceptable the way I am, that I have to change to be accepted. And this idea that there are trans kids is total baloney.
Yeah.
There is
it's a made-up word.
It's a made-up word.
Yeah.
There are no trans kids.
Yeah.
So what we have is people who have cross-dressed. That's what I was doing. When she put me in it, I was a cross-dresser. The proper term for that is transvestite. But she was growing a young transvestite. Did she know what she was doing? Did she know that I would be sitting here in 2025? No, because she had no idea.
What do you think was her motivation when she put you in that full-length chiffon dress? I mean, I'm trying to understand. This is a phenomenon on social media right now. Parents that are painting their little boys' fingernails pink, and they're taking them to Target, and they're buying, on purpose for these young people, clothes of the opposite gender. What was going through her mind? Do you feel like that was nefarious at the time? Do you feel like?
I think my grandma and the people today think that it's harmless. I think they think it's harmless. It's not.
Yeah.
If it was harmless, why am I in 2025
still
talking about
it?
something that happened?
Yeah, come on.
When I'm 4 years old, because it's destructive. It's harmful.
Would you say at 4 years old that you were struggling with your identity, that you were struggling with whether or not you were a boy, or do you think this precipitated that struggle?
That started the struggle. See, that's where it's the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, we have parents who are introducing this to, if a child shows some interest in something, if he's a boy, something that seems like what a girl would be doing. Oh, I got a trans kid. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Let's use a different word. You have a curious child.
Yeah.
Right?
That used to be okay.
That being curious used to be okay.
Yeah.
And then we let them grow out of it.
Yeah.
But we don't start affirming them or telling them they're a trans kid. That is destructive, and it's harmful, and it should never happen. And so the parents doing that, I'm sorry. They're really damaging their children, and they're going to pay the big price. Both the parents and the child will pay the hefty price for that. Yeah,
and now in our woke culture, I mean, you said a few minutes ago, and I think this is totally right, we saw the onset, rapid onset gender dysphoria really take off several years ago because of social media. And it became, TLC is doing a series called Call Me Jazz. This poor boy, honestly, they've ruined this kid.
They destroyed him.
They have absolutely destroyed this kid, and they've sexualized him.
Yep.
And I'm watching this happen. And I'm wondering where are the current, the courageous pastors who have refused to talk about this because they feel like it's something we shouldn't talk about in church. And so we've seen sort of a silence on the one end because people are struggling, going, well, maybe there is such a thing as a transgender child. And so we haven't had these conversations out in the open. And I'm thinking of you, and this is what so fascinated me when I started reading what you were writing for the Federalist and other news outlets, because you're one of the very first voices to say this is the long-term effect of this dangerous, deceitful ideology. Yep. And so at 4 years old, your grandmother puts you in this dress, and it precipitates this change inside of you. What happened after that? Yeah, well, that confusion, right, sets in.
And the only way I could be affirmed, I mean, that wasn't the word I was using, but that's what's happening, was she told me how cute I was, how wonderful I was. She would never say that when I was dressed in my scruffy blue jeans and my beat-up cowboy boots. So this affirmation is a powerful, addictive drug that parents are putting on children that's harming them. I mean, Grandma really started this, and it destroyed how I thought about myself, and what we call that today, it's called adverse childhood experiences. You can look it up. It's called ACEs, and there's actually an ACEs scale. And so when we do that to a child, we know if it's done to them before they're 17 years old, it alters the brain at the level of where their identity is being formed.
Wow.
So it's not benign.
No.
Stop it, parents.
Yeah.
I can't say this often enough. You are destroying your child. You should not have the responsibility of destroying a young child because you think it's cool,
right,
or because you want to have a trans kid, or because you think because you have a trans kid, you're smarter than everybody else. No, you're not.
I don't know if you saw this, Walt, but Annette Bening, Annette Bening, married to Warren Beatty and all of woke, weird Hollywood.
Yeah.
But several weeks ago, she was out in front of the Supreme Court, right? Because they're having these conversations now, because we see transgenderism, men, really boys competing against girls in women's sports. We'll get to that later. But something that Annette said really, really struck me, and I wonder what you think about this. She said that having a trans kid made her so much more interesting.
There you go. See, I didn't know you were going to say that. Look at what I introduced just before you said that.
Yep.
There are parents who think they are hip, slick, and cool because I have a trans kid.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Yeah.
So I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You need to get it and understand there is no trans kids. They do not exist. We are manufacturing trans kids. And it's institutionalized child abuse, and it must stop.
Yeah, it must stop. I mean, God forgive us, we've waited this long.
Oh,
right, because now we have a mental crisis in this country, the likes of which we have never seen, and we're not prepared for. And I think the church needs to be really well versed in this, because they're going to have, we need triage for this.
Absolutely.
Like right now, we need triage for this. All right, so keep your story so interesting. I keep diverting us, but tell me about. So this happens at 4. How did things progress after that?
Well, for 2 years, it was a secret. Grandma told me, keep this a secret.
That's interesting. So the fact that she told you,
she knew something was wrong.
Kind of makes me think this is nefarious on her part. She knows that what she's doing to you is wrong on some level.
Well, if she didn't know it was wrong, she knew it wasn't acceptable, right? Because she had to keep it a secret. So I got so accustomed to the affirmation, I secretly grabbed the purple dress, put it in a brown bag with my other clothes, and took it home when Dad picked me up after I was there for a weekend. Took it home, put it in the bottom drawer. A couple of days later, my mom was putting clothing away and found the paper bag, looked in the bag, found the dress. Who made the dress? Your mom did. And then all hell broke loose.
I bet.
And my dad and mom are fighting. I could never go back to Grandma's. My dad's slamming cabinet doors. It was a brutal fight.
And you're, 6 years old at this point?
Yeah. And
so you're still little.
I thought because I broke the trust of Grandma.
No.
Right?
So now
that
the
it's
guilt.
all my fault.
Yeah.
And so I caused my mom and dad to fight over this. And so the purple dress went away, but the implant in my brain was there. It was seared in. And so I thought about that purple dress every single day. And so I would go to bed at night, laying in bed, and cry myself to sleep. Like, how come I probably wasn't articulating to the point of how come they don't like me as a guy, but that's what was going. It's like, I'm not acceptable this way. I'm not acceptable. I wasn't acceptable as a girl or a boy at that point, right? Because Grandma's trying to cross-dress me. And then my dad's mad, and he starts physically using heavy discipline. I believe he was trying to shape me into a man with a hardwood floor plank, right? So, and I understood that. I mean, I totally get it. He was scared. There were no terms in the 40s. No. We haven't even got to that point, right? So I predate all of that. And that's why this is important. The effects of what happened without the terms was still destructive. You don't need the terms. But it's very destructive.
The action is evil.
Is destructive. Yeah. It harms people's brains. That's what you need to know. And it's child abuse. So I cried myself to sleep. My dad used a hardwood floor plank. When my dad's adopted teenage brother found out about my purple dress, because it became known in the family, he decided that I was fair game to be sexually abused. So now I've got the cross-dressing, I've got the hardwood floor plank, and sexual abuse.
And still, these ruts in your brain, this is hardwiring you now. I mean, I do think that's what happens especially young children, you grow up in abuse, and your brain is hardwired for trauma now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it affects the way you respond to other people. It affects the way you see yourself in the mirror. And also, and I think this is so interesting, this is certainly true in my life, that's your normal.
Yeah.
Right? That's your normal. And so you don't have somebody coming around and saying this is actually not normal. If that's all you know, if all you know is your dad knocks you down the stairs when you do something wrong, then you just assume, well, everybody's dad is knocking them down the stairs. Exactly. We just aren't talking about it, right? I mean, I feel like that is the real sorrow to me of the abuse of a child. They have no other frame of reference. This is their reality. And so they've made this concrete reality a part of your DNA. Yep. Because now you've got the confusion of the cross-dressing, you've got the sexual abuse, which they really opened you up to. Yep. And those pathways in your brain then are forming that way.
Yeah, and keep in mind when a child like I was, starts identifying as somebody else, what am I really trying to do? I am trying to escape the pain that happened to the other person. Because I actually do remember, Walt, was getting all the abuse, right? And the girl wasn't. So it's better to be the girl than be the one being, see? So that's how this happens. And so when you do this affirmation, you're actually helping, it's starting PTSD and all these other things that you're introducing to them, obsessive compulsive disorder, dissociation. I mean, at the core, this is a dissociative disorder. Because nobody in all of world history has ever changed their gender.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. You can't biologically change your gender, and it's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. The
surgeries don't fix it. The hormones don't change that reality. All we're really doing is injuring these children mentally, of which they will. I mean, unless the Lord transforms their heart and they get the healing that you have found in Christ, they're dealing with this for the rest of their lives.
Is exactly right. And there's a word I'd like to just throw out for people to think about. It's called intermorphology. And that's who you really are. And you cannot change who you are. And, biologically, we're made in the womb long before we're born. So this whole idea about, what gender were you assigned at birth? That's
ridiculous. So ridiculous.
That is like the most phony language in the whole world because they want you to think that so that they can change it afterward.
So I want to ask you. I keep interrupting your story. You say so many things. I'm like, wow. So let's talk about how important it is that we not adopt this ridiculous language. When someone says to you, "Well, why do you care what pronoun they use?" I feel like I'm not doing it. I will not participate in a lie, and that's what we're doing, right? If someone comes to me who's demonstrably a man and tells me that he's a woman because he's, on the hormones or getting the surgeries, or he's just simply because he sees himself that way, and then I am forced to participate in it, or I lose my job at the Port of Portland because I won't call somebody by a pronoun that doesn't belong to them, or I'm forced to use the terminology, as you would say, the language of this culture of deceit, it matters. What do you think about how important I keep hearing you say it doesn't exist. We shouldn't, when we use the terminology, we're literally, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but we're cementing it into the culture as if it actually is a thing.
Yeah. Pronouns, I don't use them. You and I talked all day yesterday. We've talked this morning. Have I ever used a pronoun?
No, I never noticed.
Right? I don't use pronouns with anybody.
Yeah.
I don't know. We get locked into this idea about pronouns. But the truth is, as I said, there are no transgenders.
Yep.
Nobody transitions. And when people tell me they have gender dysphoria, I say, no, you don't. You have dysphoria, but it's not related to your gender.
Interesting.
So when I work with people, I always find out that the dysphoria has nothing to do with gender. Yeah. And so I have people write me, say, I'm transgender, I transition, I have gender dysphoria. I write them back and say, you're not a transgender, you've never transitioned, you don't have gender dysphoria. If you're going to work with me, we're going to find out what really happened.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to tell the truth.
And we're going to tell the truth. And your gender was not assigned at birth. It was innate and fixed at conception.
Yeah. Turns out the Bible is actually correct.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's totally amazing.
Blows me away.
Yeah. So at what point would you say, so all growing up, now you're being abused. Well, first of all, you were abused by your grandmother.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
now you're being sexually abused.
Yeah.
what happens after that?
Well, after that, at 13, I was secretly cross-dressing. I would, in those days, they had these Goodwill bags that they put out on the curb, and I would actually go through, I had a paper route, and I would go through them. I hate to admit this, but I'd go through them and try to find women's clothing. I'd go hide them in the garage, and then I'd put them on because I was addicted to the idea that there was something wrong with me and that the only way that I could be right would be to put on women's clothing, because that's where I got the affirmation. As Walt, I was getting hit and sexually abused, and so who wants to get hit and sexually abused, right? So when
You were safer as a girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you dive into that, and this is what happens to people when they are traumatized.
Yeah.
You're trying to escape. This is not becoming somebody else. You can't become somebody else, but you can escape. And so I started identifying as Crystal West when I was like 13. I wasn't out in public much. I would still, it was very secretive back then.
This is happening in school? When you say I was identifying as Crystal, was it just to people that knew you? I mean,
there were some close friends I would tell them what's going on, but this was 1953, 1954, and so when I finally dealt with this, I had a hard time. I had a girlfriend in high school. Because it's not about homosexuality. Isn't that crazy? I mean, of the thousands of people I've worked with, Heidi, thousands of people, 90% plus are heterosexual. It's not a homosexual issue. It's an identity issue. And we have the homosexuals who are powering this thing as though it's all homosexual. That's wrong. And our churches need to understand this is not about homosexuality. This is about damaged at somewhere along their life where there's either the internet indoctrination, they were put on pornography. And I think when you talked about rapid onset gender dysphoria, that was another really bad thing that happened because it wasn't rapid onset gender dysphoria. It was rapid onset social contagion.
Come on.
Social contagion.
Yep.
And people were identifying as if they had gender dysphoria, but they did not have gender dysphoria. That book was so destructive when they came out with that. And inside the book,
you're talking about Abigail Schreier's
yes,
book?
and they came out, or in the book, it does talk about social contagion. The headline, we would have made so much better progress if the headline on that book, the cover would have said, Rapid Onset Social Contagion.
Man.
You see, the language matters.
Yeah.
And so you were asking me the question, yes, when you say you're a transgender, you're making the statement that they actually changed your gender. So I use the terminology, you're identifying as a transgender.
Okay.
You identify as transitioned. You identify as if you had gender dysphoria. None of those are true. And so I just tell everybody, you're not a transgender.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I don't.
It's like saying you're a flying pig. It doesn't exist.
I'm not a people pleaser. When it comes
I
to this.
couldn't tell that. Yeah. Well, that's shocking to me, Walt.
Yeah, I know. So,
where are you like, listen, at 84 years old, I don't actually have time to make anybody happy right now. So it is what it is. Tell the truth.
Heidi always said, it's not going to be long. I'll be in the box. I want to get it done now. You got to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
If you don't like it, too bad.
Too bad. Well, I declare a state of emergency, right, for our children and for what's happening in our schools. Here in the Pacific Northwest, they're using this model called the genderbread man, right?
I saw
and
it.
I'm sure you've seen it. Disgusting. This is disgusting stuff. And these children, they don't come to kindergarten confused. Adults are confusing them. They don't come to kindergarten, first and second grade, gender classes. Adults are doing this. These are activists disguised as teachers, and they are coming into our schools to do exactly what Satan has assigned them to do, which is to kill and steal and destroy. And someone needs to stand up and say, when are we going to care about our children? Enough to say, stop this right. It should be illegal. I mean, I think it should be. It's obviously
immoral.
Should be
jail time.
That's what I think. These people should go to jail. These surgeons that are mutilating our young children who are never going to get their lives back, never going to be the same again. These surgeons who are making billions of dollars, because now it's $1 billion plus industry.
Absolutely.
These guys should be
$4.4 billion.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
$4.4 billion. So,
unbelievable.
This is really a critical time. And I hope today that we make this a turning point.
Yeah.
Because there is no one listening to us today. If you thought there was such thing as a transgender, you thought that it was okay, when you leave or we stop doing this today, I want them to say there are no transgenders. Nobody's ever transitioned, and it's not about gender, about dysphoria. But don't get lost in the gender dysphoria.
It's so interesting that you bring up Abigail's book, because at the time, I read the book, and I mean, it was irreparable harm, right? She was talking, and she's right about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely right. And I thought, boy, I mean, this is a woman not coming at this issue from a Judeo-Christian perspective, right? She doesn't ever really bring that even into it. She's just saying, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And I never even considered, I mean, she really was also, and I don't think, she probably wasn't even thinking of it. She should have talked to you.
Absolutely. I wish she had.
Yeah, because I think she was trying to expose something that she saw as inherently wrong. But
She's right about that part.
The fact that we even use the language of so-called transgenderism is perpetuating the lie. We have to stop using the language and start changing the way we talk about it.
Yeah. We do need to stop the language. That's the first thing. Biblically speaking, socially speaking, and honesty, intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
If we're going to be intellectually honest, we have to stop saying transgender. We can say transgender identifying. We really, we should just call them cross-dressers or transvestites. And even the word detransition, I don't like it. People say I'm not a detransitioner. No one ever transitioned. And so language matters.
Yeah.
Whoever controls the language controls the outcome.
That's right.
And if you want the outcome to change, you have to stop saying transgender, transition, gender dysphoria, and assigned at birth.
So
and
interesting.
Detransition.
I love your perspective, and I think it's going to be healing to so many people who are watching this, who are trying, because now it's everywhere. I mean, this is ubiquitous in the culture, right? So we're no longer talking about a one-off here and there. We're talking about tens of thousands of children who are being injured by this ideology every single day of the week in this country, and it is devastating. And shame on these parents for pushing this on their kids. So I'm going to keep going back to your story.
Yep.
So you're 16, 17 years old.
Right.
You're in high school. You've identified as this woman, and you've given her a name. Then what happens?
Yeah, but keep in mind, there's only maybe one or two people that
know about it.
Yeah, so I wasn't out in school.
But I'm trying to imagine, Walt, the inner turmoil.
Oh.
You must have been in so much pain emotionally and mentally with this constant conflict in your own spirit.
I describe it like having a radio in your head
Yeah.
that keeps playing there's something wrong with you. You need to do this, you need to do this. It kept going on. So I couldn't turn the radio off because of what happened. Destructive. So, I started going to school. I was in track. I was in sports. I was a terrible student. Because I had so much going on.
Yeah, because you're dealing with so many other things. You can't concentrate on academics.
I was, my best grade was a D. I had teachers saying, I'm going to give you a D. You should have an F because I don't want you back in my class.
Wow.
You're just not ready. And so, and then I had a girlfriend in school. Her name was Lola Joy Phipps. Is that a cool name? Lola.
It is.
Redhead.
Lola.
And, and so... and I told her about what I was going through. We started to get close. And when I told her, she was like totally devastated. And that was another turning point because I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
You can't talk about this because now we're in the 50s or something. But when I saw the story about Christine Jorgensen, which came out, I think in 54, I don't remember the exact time, but that's when I thought, oh, this must be who I am. And so I think...
Wait, so tell listeners about that. So you say you saw the story of Christine Jorgensen.
In the headlines.
Who's this?
Christine Jorgensen was a Marine or a soldier or somebody who went through, they called it a transsexual, going through the surgery in Europe somewhere. In Belgium.
So had the surgery.
Had the surgery.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that must be me. That must be what I need. And so what they didn't talk about was that Christine Jorgensen was an alcoholic, a chain smoker, a totally whacked out, complete buffoon, angry person because their life was broken up, and this is the way that Jorgensen was trying to resolve it. They were experimenting with this poor individual who died from alcoholism, I believe, or smoking, whatever it was.
And this is not uncommon.
No.
This is not uncommon at all. Right? Someone who is struggling that much, there's a whole lot more going on
Oh, baby.
in the life of that person than the identity that they see when they look in the mirror, right? I mean, we're talking pain on a soul level.
Big time. And we look at it like, oh, well, we just need to affirm them. No, we don't. We need to crush them and let them know that you can't do this. This is not going to help you. All you're doing is causing more harm. My body's destroyed. They totally destroyed it. I'm healthy because I found Jesus Christ. That's how I can stand up and speak. Not because they did surgery on me, because Jesus Christ came into my life and I turned it over to him, and he put the Spirit in me.
You have it. I mean, I was telling you yesterday when we were talking, and Casey too. I mean, the two of you, I just love being around you because the joy of the Lord, right, which is not dependent on your circumstances. Right. Joy is the unmistakable sign of the presence of God at work in your life.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That's
healing. I'm glad you brought up Casey, because I just want to say this, which I always say is that's my smoking hot trophy wife, and she is fantastic. So,
she is. She is your smoking hot trophy wife. She's adorable.
Yeah.
She's adorable.
So, we got to, it's so important to me. And I prayed about it this morning. Folks, stop with the language. Stop abusing children. I don't care if your school has some gingerbread person, take your kid out of school.
Yeah.
Don't put them in the face of harm. Don't allow other people to destroy your child. I said this 8 years ago at a church, and I'm still saying it. I did it in South Dakota, and somebody came up and said, after listening to you, Walt, I'm taking my kid out of school. And there's too many other good places that we can...
Well, and it's entrenched in the schools now. People say, well, I'll just take my kid out of the sex ed classes. Well, good luck getting them out of history, where we're now teaching homosexual history, and we're talking about transgenders all the way back to Alfred Kinsey and all the disgusting things that he's done to children over the years. This is in every subject in the schools. Yeah. And so if we think for 1 second, I can just take my child out of sex ed, so-called sex ed, which isn't sex ed at all. It's radical, far left, progressive gender ideology. That's what it is. Nothing to do with reproduction, nothing to do with reproductive health. This stuff is devastating to children. And it is happening in kindergarten all the way through high school. And we wonder why they get out of high school and they don't have their head screwed on straight. Right. And they're confused. But I'll tell you what, they can't get a job, but they can tell you, there's 400 different genders. They can tell you all about that. It's so sad.
Well, I want to take any parent who does this to a child. I just, when I look at what happened to me because of one person,
yeah.
One person. Pitiful.
And there will be hundreds of thousands of other kids. Yeah. Just
it
this
can
is happening.
Stop.
Yeah.
It can stop. It can stop starting today.
So I'm writing notes because I have so many things. I'm gonna touch on so many things as you're talking. Like,
sure.
Gotta, my old postmenopausal brain. Now, if I don't write it down or say it immediately, it is gone. I'm impressed with you, with how sharp you are, because I feel like I'm not that sharp anymore. But I'm thinking, what got you to the point then? So now you've told your girlfriend that you're struggling. I was thinking, abuse is like this. Because I experienced this, not to the level that you did, but I experienced this when I was in high school. It is such a lonely place.
Yes.
Because you can't, and especially in the 50s. I mean, I was having, I was in all kinds of trauma in the 70s, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. That inability to openly say, this is what's happening to me. This is why I'm so thankful that you are using this horrific experience in your life, because what you're doing in speaking about it is setting people free. And you're saying it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to use the words. It's okay to say this is what happened in very plain language. Because when we're not able to do that, I feel like, I don't know how, I'm not a counselor, but I wonder what you think. I feel like just that alone compounds the trauma, because now you're alone.
Yes. And what I always ask, this is my favorite thing when I get an email from somebody or a phone call or we're in the discussion, I always ask them this question. And anybody can do this. You don't have to be a counselor or anything. I always ask them, what caused you to not like who you are? I want you to articulate what happened that caused you to not like who you are. When did it happen? What was the moment?
What kinds of things do you hear? When you say that to people, what do you generally typically hear?
Well, I'll give you an example. A guy wrote me an email. He said, I have a gender therapist.
Naturally.
I'm transgender. I transitioned and I have gender dysphoria. And I wrote him back. This was my sweet email. I wrote him back, said, well, your gender therapist is a quack. You're not a transgender. You've never transitioned.
I think you and I might have been separated at birth.
Yeah. And I said, and I doubt strongly that you have gender dysphoria. If you're going to work with me, we're going to talk about the truth.
Yeah.
And I turned to my wife and I sent the email out. I said, he'll never write back.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to lie to anybody.
No.
I'm not going to try to cozy up to him. It's not my job. My job is to tell the truth. And so he wrote back and he said, well, that's very curious. What do you want to know? And I said, well, you said this onset of this was when you were 13. Just tell me what happened and what was going on in your life briefly at 13. I just want to know that event.
Give me the bullet points.
Give me that.
Yeah.
He says, okay, my mom was a raging alcoholic. She would get a butcher knife about 3 times a week, chase my dad around the house and try to murder him. So I wrote him back and I said, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not even very brilliant. But I said, I think you suffered a traumatic event.
Possibly.
You know?
Possibly.
So I said, when you go back to this wacko gender therapist, and I love doing this, I said, tell him Walt Heyer said, I need a trauma therapist, not a gender therapist. Now catch this. It could only happen to me. He's writing back. He said, I went in and did exactly as you said. And I told the gender therapist I need a trauma therapist. The trauma therapist says, oh, that's interesting. I'm also a trauma therapist.
Naturally.
Right?
Yeah.
But
yeah,
wait
the
a
gender
minute.
therapist who's inducing trauma.
But wait a minute. So she said, well, I'll find out if Walt Heyer is right. I'll test you on the ACEs scale. And instead of our usual 1-hour session where I rip you off, we're going to do 2 hours where I can actually
rip you off twice.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So she did the ACEs scale, and he tested 7 out of 10.
Whoa.
She said, whoa, okay.
You've been traumatized.
And she said, what we're going to do is EMDR therapy. I am not an advocate for EMDR therapy. I've talked to people who say it works. Some say it doesn't. I have never had it, so I'm not advocating for it. In this case, the therapist, the gender therapist who now became a trauma therapist, did EMDR therapy.
Did she run for Congress after that?
Probably.
Yeah.
And so probably here. And so the upshot of it was that he's writing me, telling me this, and here's his own words, not mine. He said, Walt, 1 session, EMDR, I'm free. Wow. I'm free. I have no more dysphoria. See, because it wasn't about gender. That's the key. And so I said, well, I doubt it. I wasn't ready to believe him. And so for a month after that, I kept writing him and said, how you doing? He said, man, I'm free. It's over. And I said, well, I want to tell your story. I want to write about it and talk about it in the Daily Signal. He said, I'm too embarrassed. I'm so sickened that this happened to me for 60 years. He's 73 years old.
So his whole life.
He's
dealing with this his whole life.
Exactly. Because no one wants to, I'm willing to step up and go right at them and find out what happened that caused them to not like who they are. Because for me, it was purple dress, hardwood floor plank, and sexual abuse. And it's something with everybody. Find out what it is. Stop affirming them.
Right.
Stop this nonsense.
Yeah.
This is idiocy. And so if we have to boycott schools,
which we do,
and not even allow our children in there, and bankrupt this because they get paid for every student going there.
Well, in Washington State, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000, right, per kid.
Yeah.
And I'm asking this question: why in the world would we make our kids swim through a cesspool? The public schools are literally cesspools right now. Why would we make our kids swim through a cesspool to get a mediocre education, to come out and be confused about the world around them and confused about who they are and confused to the point where they don't know what a woman is?
Right.
Why would any sane parent, I mean, Walt, they'll tell me, well, I don't have enough money. Right. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Maybe you need to give up your new car. Yeah. Maybe you need to do that. You know, at what point are we going to care about our kids enough to pull them out of this godless system that's injuring our kids?
When are your kids more important than you are?
Boy, that's a mic drop.
When are your kids more important than you are?
Yeah.
Period.
Man, we live in a selfish society. We're so selfish. I mean, really, this goes back to abortion. You know, we sacrifice our kids for all kinds of reasons, right? And I think oftentimes, when parents come to me and say, well, I just can't do it. I don't have the patience, right? I mean, I've homeschooled 7 kids, Walt. I'm here to tell you, I'm not the most patient person in the whole wide world. It's not about patience. That's not why we do it. We don't do something because we're patient. We do something because we recognize that there's an outcome that we're hoping to get, and we want to protect our children. And no one protected you.
Right.
No one protected you.
And there's parents not protecting their kids either.
Yeah.
They're pushing them into the abyss.
Yeah.
And then everybody
And then they're
suffers.
posting about it on social media as if they were doing something virtuous,
Yeah.
and something powerful in the lives of these kids.
And it's what's interesting when I challenge people on their gender dysphoria and say, yeah, I believe you have dysphoria, but it's not about gender.
Mm-hmm.
And we start challenging them. Sometimes it takes months for them to acknowledge it, but in every case, when we get back to that point, they will actually tell me, you're right. I didn't have gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
I didn't need the surgery. I didn't need the hormones. And so I come from with a website called sexchangeregret.com. There is the advantage to when people are contacting me, they've already got some doubt, right? I mean, sort of built in.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be and that's why when the guy wrote me through Sex Change Regret about being 73 and having this, he's got doubts. And so I look at that and go, they already know that this isn't right. I just need to point them in the right direction. Why it's not right. And so it's so important for parents and even people who are thinking about doing this to understand the only 3 things that can only happen when you take on this idea about changing who you are. You devalue who you are, number 1. When you say, I have gender dysphoria, that's devaluating. You don't. Number 2 is you dehumanize who you are when you start taking hormones. Devalue, dehumanize. What's the last thing? Number 3, you destroy who you are when you undergo surgery. That is what this is all about. It's about cross-dressers being put in the mill of devalue, dehumanize, and destroy. Let's call them transvestites because then there is no code for giving them hormones and surgery. If we start calling them who they really are, they can't undergo surgery because there's no code in there that allows them to do surgery on them.
Well, it comes back to money. I just keep thinking about all the people that are making money on this.
Yeah.
They're making money on, destroying human beings.
Yes.
Truly. I mean, when are we going to have the Nuremberg trials? When are we going to do that? When are we going to start talking about these? I mean, we're watching, you and I'm sure, seeing a lot of the same videos and the same young people now who are coming out and just saying, they've destroyed my body.
Yes.
And I'm never going to be actually okay in the way that I could have been had they kept the scalpel away from me when I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
Shame on these guys.
This is
It's
abortion
criminal.
2.0 because many of them a boy cannot now produce sperm to be a father.
Yep.
And the girls will never become mothers in many cases because they've gone too far with this.
Yeah.
So why don't we think? What happened to the gray matter that God gave us?
Well, we're also removing that in schools, right?
Yeah.
So we're not critical thinkers anymore. I think we touched on this a little bit yesterday when you and I were talking, just the fact that we just lived through the, 3 years of the most ridiculous thing in the face of the earth when we all are standing at a dot in the middle of Walmart and they tell you, stand on this dot, here's an arrow, go this way, down the grocery aisle. No one goes, why are we doing that?
Yeah.
We're just programmed to do it. And we're literally doing that in the schools. I mean, I think pardon me, but I just think, boy, this is my hot button, as you well know. But I just think, boy, education. It absolutely matters what we're teaching these kids. We're not teaching them critical thinking. We're not teaching them basic biology. We're not teaching them how precious they are because they're made in the image of God. Because now we're telling them, well, you evolved from an animal, so it doesn't really matter. You and the frog were dissecting in 9th grade science class, pretty much the same thing. Right. And so we've got this generation of young people who can't think critically. And so when you put in front of them and say, well, maybe you're a girl. Maybe we should think about that. Well, they don't think to ask the questions. We've not taught them to ask the questions. It's just so much of the same thing. It's this cycle that we're in. But so what happens then? Well, because you end up going to college. I mean, you graduate from high school.
Yeah.
And I imagine you're still just in agony in your own mind.
Right.
Like from 4 years old now all the way through high school.
But even as a lousy student, I went to college and I took up drafting, and I worked at aerospace industry, which was just budding new business. And after a period of time, I became an associate design engineer on the Apollo space missions.
So truly, you're not dumb.
Yeah, I am.
You just told me that you're dumb.
I just got
He's
lucky.
lying.
So I was an associate design engineer on the Apollo space missions, and I eventually went into the automobile business and for American Honda Motor Company, and I became the national operations manager for the ports of entry throughout the United States.
Wow.
And I had an executive job, and I ended up becoming one of a team who developed the Acura division for American Honda Motor Company. And its early design, it was called Project X, and then it was called Channel 2, and then it was called Acura. And that's when my life totally fell apart. I was coping with alcohol.
How old were you at this point?
I was about 38, coming up on 40 by that time, about 42. I'm trying to remember.
So your whole life. So now you're late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, and so I went to the world-renowned gender specialist, Dr. Paul Walker, who wrote the WPATH Standards of Care, my therapist.
That guy is still, the WPATH, wow.
So he wrote the WPATH Standards of Care. Originally was the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care. Wow. He was my therapist. So I went to the best to make sure that I was going to get
the worst of the monsters.
Yeah. So he said, you have gender dysphoria in 1981 when I was sitting in his office. And he said, you need hormones and surgery to resolve this issue. Now, I had just disclosed to him about the purple dress, sexual abuse, physical abuse.
So he has all the pieces.
He has the information.
Yeah.
But he says, you need hormones and surgery.
Yeah. There's money in it for him, dude.
And so 2 years later, in 1983, I went through the surgery and lost my family. My daughter, bless her heart, didn't speak to me for 8 years. The 8 years I was
Now you have a daughter. We missed this part. I didn't know.
Yeah, she's beautiful.
Were you married?
I was married and had 2 children.
Okay, so we missed this whole. I missed this whole part.
Yeah. So when I went
when did the daughter appear?
I got married when I was about 22.
Okay.
And started having children, and then I was married for many years, for about 15 years, and that's why I say I wasn't homosexual, but I was struggling. And I was a churchgoer. We went to church, Forced Home Christian Conference Center. I spoke with pastors, and nobody in those days knew what to do.
Yeah.
They had no idea.
No.
And many of them today don't know what to do.
I'd say sadly that's true.
And so my passion is to talk to as many pastors. Listen, if you're a pastor hearing this today, please have me come and talk to your church. Let's sit down and talk. And don't be afraid to do this. I've got books. I've got everything you need. We can equip you and your church.
And maybe save some of the people in your church.
If we can save one, it's worth it. Yeah. If we can save more, thank God. So, I went to this therapist, and we got divorced before I went for the surgery, and we wept. And, this is it, because there was no Walt Heyer out there. There was no big warning,
Nobody was telling you, hey, the road's washed out ahead of you.
Right.
Right.
The bridge
and so
is
you're
out.
careening down this road toward the surgeries and the hormones and this quack of a doctor who's about to make a whole lot of money, turning you into a lifetime patient, which is essentially what they're doing.
April in 1983. Then I notified Honda that, I'd gone through this procedure. They canceled my job. They just removed the position. We don't have that position anymore.
They wouldn't do that anymore. They put your name on a poster and try to get money from the government.
And so they waltzed me out the door, and I was tried to get work in those days, in the 80s, and it didn't happen. I ended up in a park as an alcoholic, homeless. So
you've given up a wonderful career.
And a family.
Blew up your family.
Yeah, and I was laying in a park in Long Beach, California, with my face in a pile of vomit. And wearing a rabbit fur coat, identifying as a female. That's what the purple dress did. Now, if that's what you want, go for it. But you got to be a blithering idiot to not listen to an old man say, don't do this. And so, that was the point of where I called somebody that I knew, and I said, I need AA. And so I started going to meetings. I smelled so bad in that AA meeting in Pacific Palisades, which is burning in California. I went to a church there. And so they wouldn't even...
That's a whole other thing, right?
They didn't even come around me, except there are two 2 gay guys came up to me and said, where are you staying? You look like you don't have a place to stay. And I said, I don't. And they said, well, we have a garage. And so they took me and put me in the garage. They wouldn't let me in their house. Mm-hmm. And so they ended up getting a used couch, and they ended up, they were AA people. They'd had several years of AA. Mm-hmm. And so they actually introduced...
They just wanted you to get sober.
They wanted me to get sober. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't care about Laura. They called me Nicole. They had all these other names.
So what name are you going by at this point?
Laura.
Okay.
But it became comical. They were both kind of funny. Mm-hmm. And so we'll call you Nicole because we think it's a better name. I mean, they were like inventing things. So they were actually
a couple
of characters. So he became my sponsor, the gay guy. And so that was okay with me. I didn't, no one else would talk to me, right? And so he started.
And here you're in desperate need of help.
And this guy was very wealthy, and he didn't have to work. He took me to meetings. He took me in he had a big expensive house, gave me a room, he fed me, he took care of me. And there was never one word about me being homosexual or trying to push that. All he wanted to do is make sure that I got sober. Mm-hmm. But after about a year, he told me, he says, I think you have maybe a dissociative disorder. Now, he wasn't a doctor, but that was his take on it. Mm-hmm. So he stayed with me until he died in October.
Wow.
And he was 88.
Wow.
And so I did get sober. I've got almost 38 years. I'm only a few months short of 38 years of clean and sober. So that's through the power and grace of Christ. Yep. Yep. So that's kind of, that's where it went. And
I want to touch on something. I don't want to dive so far into it, but I think it's important. And you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah.
I feel like we whitewash these surgeries.
Yeah.
I think we whitewash abortion in this country. We talk about a choice instead of the dismemberment of a living human being, the scalding to death, the suffocating, the decapitation of a little tiny innocent human being in his mother's womb. And I feel like in some respects we do the same thing with transgenderism, because all we say is, well, he had a surgery. They had surgeries. These are mutilating, devastating, Frankensteinish procedures that are being performed every single day of the year. In fact, I don't know if you saw this, but there's a really wicked, evil surgeon in Seattle, Washington right now who got on to social media. He's he does gender, transition surgeries, whatever. And he said he's doubled up his caseload because he's so afraid that the Trump administration is going to come in and put an end to it. And so he, on his social media, is inviting people. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm working overtime. Hurry up, come get your surgeries before they make this stuff illegal. And no one ever says, you have to do a pretty deep dive to really see how horrific. But these are not victimless crimes. You can't just transition. We hear the term, top surgery. What that really is it's a young girl having her healthy breasts removed who will never be able to nurse a child, never know the beautiful connection that she would have had with that little one.
That's right.
These are not victimless crimes.
Not at all.
What do you say about that?
Well, I had a lot of top surgeries. I had probably 6 or 8 going in and out, going back and forth. They're too big. They're too small.
So painful.
Oh, yeah, and expensive.
Yeah.
And then had bottom surgery, which never works right. Mm-hmm. It is so barbaric.
That's the word.
It's barbaric.
Yeah.
It's totally barbaric.
It makes me angry. Wow, I'm sitting here and I just want to cry.
Yeah.
It makes me so angry that people are profiting off of the mental anguish of another human being, and the solution to that is to mutilate their bodies. Why are we allowing this?
And I can tell you, the people, 50% of the people who go through, men that go through the bottom surgery, it doesn't work right. They have a lot of problems with smell, with urinating. It doesn't work right. Infection.
Pain.
This is not a clean deal.
No.
There's nothing clean about it. And
because it's not healing.
That is one of the reasons why. Hear me out. We'll stop and pause for just a second. Listen to this. Take a moment. Because you're 19 times more likely to die by suicide after you take the hormones and have the surgery, because It is so destructive,
To your
so
body.
damaging. You cannot get your head around it. I attempted suicide twice.
So the lie, when they say, well, either they get the surgery or they're going to commit suicide, that's a lie.
The whole thing is a lie.
The whole thing, yeah.
I mean,
But that's particularly, I mean, when you tell a parent, well, you're either going to get a living son or a dead daughter.
yeah. And they've been saying that for even back when
Manipulative, yeah.
I mean, so that's not even a new phrase.
Oh, well, I'm so angry.
Oh, yeah, me
I'm
too.
so angry.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're destroying people. Mm-hmm. You're not helping anybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, thank the Lord that he's kept me alive, because I tried to kill myself by jumping off a building. I tried to overdose on cocaine.
After the surgery.
After the surgery.
All of it, yeah.
Yeah, because...
So it wasn't the fix that they said it would be.
No. It was the most destructive, biggest mistake of my entire life. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you. I hate to admit it. There isn't a day that goes by I don't have about a 5-minute weep.
Yeah.
Because of what I did.
Yeah.
And I'm responsible for it.
Well, and because of what was allowed to be done to you. And this is where I just think, if that surgery would have been illegal, you wouldn't have been able to get it. You might have tried, and maybe you'd have got it on the black market. Like, women would still get abortions, right, if abortion was illegal. But there are things that we can do.
Yeah. And I would like to sit with Donald Trump, like you and I are, and say, make sure that you end it.
I'm gonna pray that happens. We talked about this yesterday.
You know,
he needs to talk to you.
Yeah, this needs to stop. Mm-hmm. There's nothing, absolutely nothing that comes from this. Mm-hmm. Nobody changes gender. Nobody, and so the language is important. Everything we do is important.
Yeah,
and so it needs to stop.
I wonder, what would happen if at the highest places of authority in our land, we had an honest discussion. We've watched now social media for years and years. If you said something negative about Drag Queen Story Hour, bam, you're in Instagram jail.
Yeah.
You know, if you said they're teaching gender ideology, this wicked lie of gender ideology to little children, then the social media goons came after you and you wound up in Facebook jail, or you got deplatformed, or what. YouTube's one of the worst, actually. And I don't even know if we can air most of this conversation on YouTube, because they just deplatform. So then you have to go to Rumble and other places. Yeah. But I am encouraged, and I have a feeling you are too. Mm-hmm. We need to have these conversations out in the open. Yes. We have to be able to speak the language that will bring healing, instead of these cloaking what's actually happening and whitewashing it. In terms of, I got my transition surgery. Well, let's talk about what that really means. And we haven't done that. How important is it that in Congress and in the Senate and at our city councils and on our school boards, we bring these issues up and we talk about them with honesty and clarity?
Yeah, instead of calling it transition surgery, I want to call it dehumanizing.
Yeah.
You had dehumanizing surgery. That's what you had. Mm-hmm. You didn't transition. Mm-hmm. You see how important it is for us to reprogram how we think and how we speak about this subject, because every time we use these terms, we're actually helping them.
Yeah.
And I'm tired of helping them, because I'm guilty of early on saying these things.
Well, me too. I didn't realize. I mean, honestly, I'm talking to you and this sort of light bulb is coming on. Like, I've been saying transgenderism alive for a long time, but I would still use the language.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you go to Target, which I never do. I don't go to Target. I quit going to Target a long time ago. I believe in boycotts.
Yeah.
But if you go to Target, you're going to find, trans is beautiful. They have, what do you call that? That clothing that they're giving to little boys to help them tuck their genitalia up so that they look like a girl. What in the world? Why Target is still in business is absolutely beyond me.
For the money, we can destroy kids. We can use them like little lab rats.
Yep.
We can destroy kids. It's okay. We protect animals. Dogs and cats are treated better in this country than our own kids. There is actually a group of people that vehemently protect animals.
Yeah.
We don't protect our kids at all. The government is allowed to destroy your child. And keep in mind, this is the key. If you can destroy a boy or a girl, the foundation of the church, one man, one woman, and kids, the cornerstone of the church is marriage, one child, not transgenderism. And so if you can destroy that, you can actually destroy the church. And that's what's happening. We've got our churches putting people who identify as transgender in the stinking pulpit.
Crazy.
What kind of buffoonery is that? Show me in Scripture.
Yeah.
And they will point out some idiot thing that we can disprove. And so we need to get honest, straight up, get our families back together. The core thing in this country that built this country is families and church. Our Lord Jesus Christ is crying today, crying for you, every person listening. Stop this madness. I've given you every bit of information you need in Scripture to stop it. Now it's your turn. Get up, stand up, get on the playing field, stop sitting in the bleachers.
Man, see, you and I were saying this yesterday. Walt, I think one of the greatest compliments of my life when you looked at your wife and said, she might be the female version of Walt Heyer. And I was like, yes, let's go. You say, get onto the field. And for years and years, I've been saying, get off the bench and get into the battle.
Absolutely.
This is a battle, and it requires every single one of us to be in. I don't care if you're having a hard time having the conversation. Have the conversation. Yeah. We need to, for our children and for our grandchildren. I want to talk. I have a couple more really important things I want to ask you.
Yes.
Tell us about meeting Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Tell us about, because these are pivotal moments in your life in which the real healing then starts to happen.
Well, I wrote a poem, I was calling out to Jesus. The poem is, Who Am I? And I was calling out to Jesus, are you there? Are you there, Jesus? I'm reaching out my hand. Will you reach down and pull me up?
And how many years into you living as Laura is this? Because you lived as her as...
Probably about 6 years in, after living about 8 years, maybe 7 years, close to 8 years, I'm writing that. The poem was actually published in Omni magazine. The magazine's defunct now, but it was actually published. And they found it was just compelling. And so that was probably, I don't know exactly when it was right off the top of my head. I was so distraught and stuff at that time.
Just in pain.
And so I was right after I attempted a suicide that I wrote the poem, because I'm going, oh, man,
at this point, you've tried everything.
Yeah.
At this point, you've tried everything. You've been married, right? You've got a child. You were successful in your career.
Yeah.
Nothing is helping this anguish that's in your head. And so then you go and you get this quack of a doctor who lies to you and profits off your pain.
Yeah.
And performs these surgeries, and you're still not feeling better. And it's been all of these years,
right.
And you finally are like...
And so I got into recovery. I started going to AA meetings, and so then I was working, those people who are familiar with, there's a thing called the 4-step. And so you look at all the things that you had resentment for, the cross-dressing, the hardwood floor plank, the sexual abuse, the doctor who diagnosed you wrong, all that sort of stuff. You're looking at all these things, and so in the 4-step, I'm meeting with a Christian psychologist, and we're going through them line item by line item. This is, I don't know, 2 hours, maybe 3-hour session, 2.5, I don't remember exactly. And when we went through each one of these items, and I forgave everybody. I went through it, and I said, I forgive my grandma.
Not carrying it around anymore.
I forgive my dad. I forgive my uncle. I forgive the doctor who told me that I had gender dysphoria. I forgave the doctor who sliced up my body like a piece of sushi. I forgave everybody. And the struggle I had was forgiving myself.
Wow.
That was the big one, because I had destroyed so much. But I got there. And so at the end of that session, I had it all written down, and I'd that was the completion of my 4-step. And he said, well, let's go outside. And we took that paper I had all these things written down on and went outside in his parking lot. And he lit that paper on fire. And he let the wind just consume them as the flames took it and went, whew, boom, it was gone. It was very cathartic. And I did feel like, okay, I'm not hanging on anymore. And he said, we need to go back and pray about this. And I go, oh, boy. I've already done 2.5, 3 hours. I'm tired.
This guy's a prayer.
And this guy was one of them long prayers.
He's an intercessor.
Oh my gosh, I'm a 30-second wonder.
You needed an intermission from his intercession.
I did. I'm a 30-second wonder. That's like, I'm just being honest. Don't judge me. And so I thought, oh no, if we go up there, I'm going to be there for another 2 hours, and this guy's going to pray about it. And so I said, okay. And so he's praying, And I'm thinking, how long is he going to pray? And he's praying, and I'm going, oh my gosh, how long is he going to pray? And I was not in it. And
you were not into it.
No, I was not.
You were not picking up what he was putting down.
No, and he was laying it down, probably doing a great job, and all of a sudden I didn't hear him. Things went silent. And at that point, I was looking up, and I saw Jesus, and he had his arms outstretched toward me, and he was coming down kind of not directly at me, but in front of me, and I looked in front of me, and there was a little baby there, and I realized the Lord's coming for that baby, and that baby is me. He's coming for me when I was a baby, not at 50 years old, which is when I had that prayer. And he picked that baby up, and he looked at me, and he says, you are now safe with me forever. And he disappeared. And I was so taken aback by that event. I didn't even tell the guy who was doing the prayer what happened. I could not take it in. It was so powerful. I mean, I knew that he'd redeemed me, but I didn't know how people were going to react if I said, I just saw Jesus and he redeemed me. They're going to, well, it's a wacko. He's a drug addict, an alcoholic, right? So I processed
hung on to it.
I processed that for a couple of years, and then I started getting this little thing I called a nudge, and it was about a decision I was making, and it came to me. When I get the nudge, that's the Holy Spirit.
Yep, I'm familiar.
And he's in me.
Yep.
And so I listened to that, and that's my story. And the Lord I've been walking with the Holy Spirit, and when he nudges me, I get the nudge, I go.
I think it's important to say, too, because this has been my experience, I think you sort of spend your whole life not in that place when you meet the Lord, but certainly it can come back to hurt you. It can come there are moments when you're just like, whoa. And it's the going back, I think, back to the Lord, back to the well. And I'm imagining, because there's a lot of people listening to this today who are like, well, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like I accepted Christ, and I still feel the grief, the shame, and I know that you, I'm sure, from time to time wrestle with those things because you still have an enemy.
Oh,
right?
yeah, sure.
What do you say to the person who is really there? And it doesn't have to be a struggle with transgenderism. It can be a struggle with, it doesn't matter what it is.
No, that's right.
But the enemy keeps trying to pull them back, even though they've opened their hearts to the grace and forgiveness of Christ.
Yeah, I think what's important for all of us, this isn't me included, is that we all need to take a moment. That's why it's so important for us to be in prayer.
Yeah, every day.
Every day. And we need to also, if we're still struggling with what you're talking about and people have doubts, think in your mind about what is it that I haven't given up to Jesus?
Oh, that's good.
What is it? What am I hanging on to? Is it, if I got a nefarious relationship that people don't know about? Am I looking at stuff on the computer I shouldn't be doing? Have I been lying to somebody?
What's the open door that the enemy is he's got his foot in there or whatever it is?
Because if you have something like that going on, he's going to get in.
Yep.
And you need to close that loop. And so there's a barrier between you and Jesus, and that means there's something still yet incomplete. Maybe you need to forgive somebody. Maybe it's somebody you just don't want to forgive.
And I'm sure you've heard this. I don't even know where it comes from. But a long time ago, I heard a statement that my lack of forgiveness, my unwillingness to forgive, maybe it's the person that hurt me the most, right? In my case, it was my dad. But that unwillingness to forgive him would be like me swallowing poison and expecting he would die.
Exactly.
It's just that unforgiveness results in bitterness. It's a brokenness in my own heart.
Yeah.
And you can forgive someone and not have a relationship with them, but let go of that, that because it just pulls you back into it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think once you forgive someone, at least I notice this in my own life, I start to see them in a different way.
Yeah.
I wonder what was the thing that happened to my dad that hurt him, because something did.
Yeah. That's
something. We don't come into this world, I don't think, with this bent toward whatever it is.
Yeah.
Something hurt him and his father before him, and these generational sins. And what I love so much about you, Walt, and I've experienced this in my own life, is that God wants to free us from those generational curses.
Absolutely.
Because so often they are generational, right? And they pull us, they threaten to pull you back in. And then it affects my children, and now I have grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
So my children and my grandchildren and their children, and the Lord of Heaven's armies is saying, I'm going to set you free.
Yeah.
That's the miracle.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how when we forgive somebody, you know, and we really do, we really get into the forgiveness. I've heard this so many times. They say, wow, I forgave them and they've changed.
It's true.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
That
like,
person
oh.
really changed after I forgave them.
Yeah. It's like, no, it's your perspective.
It might be somebody else who changed.
Might be somebody else who changed.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say to the person who's listening to this today who has a child who has been indoctrinated into this ideology? It's typically happening in the schools now, but obviously it's ubiquitous, right? It's on social media.
Yeah.
We've made, superstars out of, idiots like Dylan Mulvaney.
Yeah.
How does a mother or a grandmother or a grandfather or an aunt or an uncle, and they recognize, I have a confused child in my life?
Yeah.
What do you say?
I think the parents are really in the best position to identify what happened or what is happening.
But you got to be willing to see it.
You got to be willing to see it. And, I've seen where older siblings are doing this to their younger siblings.
Yep. You got to be willing to see it.
And we need to shut things down in our homes. And so...
What do you mean? When you say shut things down, what do you mean?
The internet is a huge deal. So I tell parents, you need to check the search engine on every computer that your child has every day.
Boy, it's exhausting being a parent in the age of the internet.
It should be.
I got to say.
It's a big responsibility. You're saving a life.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look at what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. And I even suggest that we shut down the internet on the computers. Never let them have a computer in their bedroom. Mm-hmm. It must be out in the open space at a table where everybody walking by can look at what they're looking at.
And it's so hard. Well, I got to say.
Well, you got 7 kids.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
I got to say, even last night, my daughter, everybody's getting ready for bed and my husband was working really late. And 11:30 at night, I'm dragging myself down the hall, down to her room. And I'm like, waking her up. Give me your phone.
Yeah.
I want your phone.
Yeah.
Mom, I want your phone. I want your Kindle. I want all of it. Because even though we put those safeguards on, kids are smart. They can work their way around it. Right. The internet is it's a Leviathan.
Yeah. Well, we could get a gun safe, right?
Yeah.
Put everything in the gun safe and lock it. Don't let them have the...
Not a bad idea.
That's what I would do today. It's dangerous.
It is dangerous.
It's dangerous out there. And I even told this to one father who, I said, check the computer. He wrote back, he said, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. He said, I got sick to my stomach.
Yeah, it is sickening.
And there was somebody grooming his boy.
Yeah. So when a parent says, okay, I see my child is struggling, they're confused, whatever.
Yeah.
Walk us through some of the, what do we have? How do you have this conversation with your child? Because you don't want to injure the child, and you don't want to cement the fact that what you just said, that something's wrong with them.
Right. One parent, don't do 2 parents. One parent who has the best relationship, it can be mom or dad, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. One parent have a quiet time, and they start sitting down and having a deep conversation. Look, you're a beautiful young girl, or you're a handsome young boy, and I love you so deeply. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
See, don't let any interruptions during this time. You have that quiet time with that child and begin saying, I've seen some things that I don't understand. Help me understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. We can go through this together. Mm-hmm. And hug on them. I love you. And I've worked with the parent who did this, and these were 4 in a row that I had during a 2-week period, actually. And all of them, the kid, when they said, what caused you to not like who you are, or what happened, that language, you can pick your own language, every one of those childs was able to tell mom what happened. And it ended up that they ended up hugging mom. Both now, the child and the mom, One was an adopted child. In an adoption.
So he came into the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
But I still had the same conversation, and it turned out absolutely beautiful. And so sometimes our children don't think that we hear them. And if we take time and sit down with them and start having that conversation and start listening to them and find out exactly what it is. And it may not happen on the first conversation. Just tell them, I want to keep having this conversation.
I love you.
And maybe take them somewhere. Go get them out of the environment so that they know you and they love you too, but they want to know that you do hear them. And they will tell you if you keep going and keep digging, find out what it is.
So important. You have a website.
WaltHeyer.com.
WaltHeyer.com. And if people want to reach out to you, because you also have is it TPUSA Faith now that's doing Sex Change Regret? Can people still go to that website?
You can go to sexchangeregret.com. It's at Lucas Miles Church, and there's a staff of people who can answer those questions. You feel free to contact them. They've got
great information. What will people find if they go to sexchangeregret.com?
Well, they'll be able to write an email into there, and they will have people who will respond to them. There's 3 people right now who are answering emails and taking care of your questions. And I've trained them myself, and I've worked with Lucas for the last over a year getting this up and running. It's a great spot. If you want to contact me directly, WaltHeyer.com.
I love that. You said something when we were talking yesterday, and I thought it was so great. You mentioned something about replacing Rachel Levine.
Ah, yes.
I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
Tell me about your great idea, Walt.
My great idea, and for those who are interested, is I want to replace Rachel Levine at HHS.
Yes.
If only for one day. If only for 1 hour. If only my name is mentioned. Because I believe that all of the lefties who have been pushing this nonsense their hair will catch on fire just like it's happening in California. It'll be ablaze.
Dude, and I would be here for it.
Yeah.
I would be here for it. Because Rachel Levine is not a woman. This is a dude.
Oh,
see, really, and you know what? He's an ugly woman too. I'm sorry.
I had a guy in his hometown put me on the radio and say, I want you to talk about Rachel Levine. And I said, you do not want me to talk about Rachel Levine. And we had this whole argument during the show. And I said, don't do this because you will be off the radio.
But you know what? You're a truth teller.
Yeah.
You're dropping truth bombs all over the place. Yeah, you are.
I've told people I want to sit across from that wacko.
No kidding.
Anytime.
Yeah.
And we'll have a conversation.
Let's go.
Let's go. Baby.
Well, he cried like a little girl.
Yeah.
He couldn't handle you, Walt.
Yeah, I know.
He can't handle the truth.
I could deck him, and I'm 84.
So true. It's so true. I want to talk about your books because you've written some great books. I've got them here at the table. What's this one? Transgender's Faith.
That's my testimony that we just shared. And it talks about the people who came around me. It talks about all the ways that you can find a way to help people who are struggling. That's a great book. That's my first book written.
Where do they get? Are these books at Amazon? They just find them?
You can go to my website, WaltHeyer.com,
so
and
I'll
we
link
have
back to it today.
a library.
I love it.
Paper Genders. This book, I got to tell you, is fantastic. This shows how things like the frontal lobotomy and other things there are surgeons who are trying to become psychologists by carving people up like sushi chefs. That's what this is about. I use 3 examples of how doctors have been doing surgery on people for years.
Wow.
And that is a fantastic...
Whatever happened to the Hippocratic Oath?
Yeah.
Like first do no
they
harm.
Threw it out
kind
the
of
window.
threw it out the window.
These books are published in many different countries.
I love it. And then Trans Life Survivors.
I took the emails without using their name, changed the location. They're emails of the individuals, 30 of them, who wrote me. I used their email so you could see what the people were saying to me when they wrote emails. And one of them was a lesbian who was given control. And they say, if you just let them have their life, they'll be fine. And they let her have her life, and she committed suicide. So the answer isn't affirming them.
Wow. I mean, just opening this up for half a second. David to Donna at age 23. And you're saying this man started his transition to female at age 19, had surgery at 23. They're so young.
Yes. So
young. At that time, doctors lined up to counsel, operate, and medicate, but now silence from the medical profession. That's what happens, right?
Exactly.
When they go, oh, hey, this isn't working. Oh, hey, you lied to me. Bam. Door closes. Help dries up. It's not like they're not coming back and saying, oh, hey, I'm sorry. Let me fix that for you.
And I can't get my books in a Christian bookstore because they're not Christian enough.
Okay. Just don't get me started on that.
Sorry about that.
That's a whole other podcast.
It's like, well, your books aren't all that Christian. I said, well, I write the books for people who need Jesus.
Right. It's the sick
Sorry.
right.
I don't write them to the audience.
Well, and truly, these books should be in every Christian bookstore in America because this is a problem, and it is not limited to secular America. This is everywhere. It's in the church. I think I told you yesterday I spoke on this topic years ago at a homeschool conference. When Bruce Jenner, who we should stop calling him Caitlyn, and he's doing a disservice to the. I mean, Fox News, Sean Hannity. What is wrong with these people? Here you got Caitlyn Jenner, right? Bruce Jenner talking out of both sides of his mouth, how he says men shouldn't be in women's sports, but then he wants to win. He took an award for Woman of the Year.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Talk about a hypocrite.
Yeah, he's a hypocrite. Yeah. Before we stop, because we didn't even talk about this, talk to me about the fight to save women's sports.
Yeah.
And the work that is being done now. I just saw a couple of days ago, the Congress, there were only 2 Democrats in the entire Congress who crossed the ideological aisle, so to speak,
right,
to say, yeah, we probably shouldn't. Men and women's sports. I mean, women are getting their brains, beat in wrestling matches, in boxing, boxing against women, volleyball getting spiked.
One was paralyzed or something.
Unbelievable.
She's got an eye that doesn't work right because of the spiking.
If your daughter, what would you do? Well, let's say that your daughter's in 11th grade, and she's trained her whole life in whatever her given sport, and a transgender player, we should not even know what
a man
says, I want to play
dressed up like a woman.
There you go, thank you. And a man who's dressed up like a woman says, I am identifying this way, and I want to play on the team. And now your daughter, who's worked her whole life to get to this point, so she's looking at maybe a scholarship to college.
You don't want to ask me what I would do.
I do. I'm asking.
No, I'd be arrested.
Would you let your daughter? I mean, what's more important to you, the daughter playing in that soccer match or that wrestling match or whatever it is, or would you say we're going to boycott? I'm sorry. I know this is so hard on you. This is an awful situation.
Yeah. It's the same thing as saying pronouns. You don't do it.
Yeah.
You don't participate.
Yeah.
And that's why President Trump needs to stop it. He can stop it.
He can.
He can stop this nonsense in a heartbeat.
On day one. Yeah.
And I pray he does.
Boy, I do too. Walt Heyer, you are a national treasure, and I mean it. This has been such an honor for me. I mean, truly brought me to tears. They're bringing me napkins because I can't stop crying. I am so encouraged to see what the Lord has done in your life. The joy that just we didn't laugh a whole lot, but you are a hoot and holler and good time.
Oh, well, thank you.
You and your beautiful wife, and I can't wait to see what's next for you. And I'm just so proud of what God's done in your life.
Thank you. And I encourage people to buy the books because this is how we support our ministry.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, we don't sell many books. But these are, I've never said this before. I'm actually an excellent writer. Because I've got
Well, you've written all over the book. You're writing for the Daily Signal. You just wrote for the Federalist. I'm going to link back to, I will link back to several of the articles that I have read of yours in the show notes today. So if people are interested in just seeing what you write, and also, might be, well, you and I should talk about this off camera, but maybe I can buy some of your books and take them on the road with me so that they're on my table because I speak all over the country.
That'd be fantastic.
And these questions come up all the time.
My smoking hot trophy wife built these books on the coffee table in our house.
Your smoking hot trophy wife.
And she does the covers. She does everything. She puts these books together. We don't go outside for that. She's that good.
She's an extraordinary woman. And we hardly even, when did you meet Casey? When did you, because you guys celebrated what, 20, did you say 27 years? 20, how many years?
27.
27.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
How'd you guys meet? We didn't even talk about that.
Well, we had, when I was Laura, she had a friend that I was actually living with. And she was renting out rooms, and I rented a room.
Yes.
So there's the ladies, right? And so she was coming over to see this lady, and she said, "I hear you have a new roommate named Laura," and said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Well, where is she? I want to meet her." She said, "She's downstairs working on her car." So we knew each other for about 5 years, and she never saw me as Laura.
Yeah.
And so that was I was hiding.
Yeah.
Because the Lord had something going, and we ended up getting married, and so 5 years. I started actually praying with her on the phone that she would find a husband. And
The Lord has a sense of humor.
And I made it.
Praying for yourself.
I made the cut.
Praying for yourself.
Yeah, there you go.
I
So
love
yeah,
it.
buy the books, please. And so
I love it.
What a pleasure.
Oh.
Well, what an honor. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Let's
Great
do it
day.
again. We'll stay in touch.
You
You're
bet.
straight fire. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
You guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Heidi St. John podcast, and I hope that you'll share it with your pastor. I hope you guys light this up on social media. We're going to have clips for you, obviously, on all the social media platforms. But the bottom line is that we've got to stop lying about this issue. We have to tell the truth. The Bible says it's the truth that sets us free, and we know that that truth is found in Jesus Christ. And in God's word, he tells us, I created them male and female in my image. At the end of the day, this is a spiritual battle. It is an affront against Creator God. It's an assault against his children. And we have the opportunity to tell the truth and speak life into this topic. So I hope you guys will pick up Walt's books. I'll link back to them in the show notes today. Check out his website at waltheyer.com. And I hope you guys feel burdened to pray for Walt and Casey in the ministry that God has called them to. They're having a tremendous impact. And you can join me in praying that somehow Walt Heyer gets connected with President Trump, because you guys, that would be straight fire. We have an opportunity right now. The Lord has chosen mercy over judgment in this country, and we have an opportunity to turn this around at the highest positions of authority in the land. So I hope you'll join me in praying for that. Don't forget to visit our sponsor today, notconsumed.com/Heidi. If you use Heidi at the end of your purchase, you'll save 15% off. And I hope you guys will check it out, notconsumed.com/Heidi. We love you guys. Thank you for listening, and I will see you right back here again at the intersection of faith and culture.